Hi, my name is Jerlando Jackson. I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I hold the Vilas Distinguished Professor of Higher Education role, as well as I direct Wisconsin's Equity Inclusion Laboratory, the Vilas. My first experience with studying black males began back in about 1999, where I was a part of an evolving organization called Brothers of the Academy. In 1998, 26 up-and-coming African-American males were identified to be featured in a book. And in 1999, the work began, and then the book came out in 2000. As the group publicized the book, the energy and synergy that was present as we came together to do marketing and promotion was so powerful that we felt we needed to build on this affinity and develop a group. And because one of the major objectives of the Brothers Academy was collaborative scholarship, and the one unifying topic across all disciplines was this focus on black males. And so we did publications together, which caused me to begin to think about, for the first time, how I would include race in my work. My initial line of inquiry dealt actually did not include race as a variable or focus. I looked very much at executive and administrative behavior, following in the family of studying from Henry T. Mintzberg from 68 to 73 on down. And so that was how I began, and most of the work that was part of my tenure portfolio actually did not include race. But this experience led me to think about how I could blend interest in understanding something about this, what we're doing in our affinity group, our research group, and I started contributing publications that looked at black males as higher education professionals, which was the most reasonable way for me to think about how I would integrate race into the work that I was doing. And as I was doing that work and learning more about the lack of research in that particular space, as well as the significant gaps that needed to be filled both from a research standpoint and a policy standpoint, it became much more intriguing to me. Even more so, people were beginning to gravitate to reading that work more than the work that I called to be my primary interest. And so luckily I was able to start development studies that looked at the engagement, recruitment, and retention for males of color to higher education and professional roles, which ultimately resulted in the development of a model that institutions could utilize to have a systematic approach on how you could help identify, support, recruit, and retain males of color, but in this case, black males. And then from there, I looked at hiring practices and upward mobility challenges. And so within the hiring practices, I was able to model the hiring process through statistical methods. And we found some very interesting results, which in a lot of ways resonates with what we tend to believe but may not have evidence on, and that is when you create these models where you control for all known differences, you create a statistical utopia, something that doesn't quite really exist. But when you are able to do this, you learn what happens if all things were created equal. And what we did find in that work and subsequent work, that if all things were equal, people of color, black males in particular, in that particular study, would be selected and promoted at a much higher rate than their counterparts. And if you think about more closely, well, why might that be the case? When you look at the type of information that we share with students and young professionals, and what you hear growing up, that you must do 10 times as much work or be 5 times much better, that materializes into a higher level or more accrued assets. So you'll see higher levels of productivity, you'll see the accumulation of high quality degrees and experiences at a much higher rate than counterparts. And so when you put that in a statistical model, you would get what we found. But what we do know is that we don't live in a statistical model, and that all things are not created equal, and that there are some key decisions that occurs by individuals that integrate organizational disparities into the hiring practices. And then from there, my work has progressed into looking at glass ceiling effects, where we have had a project for maybe about 10 years where we studied women and people of color in higher education, and we looked at the glass ceiling effects, where we've isolated the senior most positions in the academy, and we have been able to develop a career pathway to model over time as one moves up the professional accession, that their probability of selection is significantly decreased. And we have operationalized glass ceiling effects to be distinctly different from other forms of general inequities. Unfortunately, the literature does not always differentiate glass ceiling effects from general inequities, and so we have some muddied understanding and dialogue out there. But for us, it is the senior most positions, and probability of selection must decrease over the life course of one's career. And in that work, we were able to do some gender-specific analysis as well, and found some similarly interesting results around navigating those senior level roles. And of particular interest, I think, here today would be that perseverance was a very key dynamic, that for those that were able to self-create support systems and structures, that they were able to persevere through early career, mid-career, that on the tail end there were a lot of professional benefits and opportunities made available to them, assuming you were able to persevere in that same way. At the same time, we also found that probably the most difficult point of the professional succession was entry into the academy. Our data showed that women and people of color had the most difficult time obtaining their first jobs in the academy because of the levels of scrutiny and how the evaluation of their materials and the whole evaluative process. And so those are a couple of the type of interesting aspects that came out of the glass ceiling effects work. And then from there, where you'll start to see my work moving is more to a decision science perspective. In all the cases that I mentioned before, where we largely spent time trying to understand hiring based on accrued assets, accumulation of work, that's inadequate to understand the differential observed outcomes that you see in the academy. we do not see women and people of color selected at higher rates. And so how do you come to understand and explain that? You have to now spend a little more time understanding about the human element of hiring, the human aspects related to promotion, upward mobility. And so you will likely see, coming off my sabbatical now, some decision experiments in place where we would really want to get a sense of, what's shaping the decisions to select or not select individuals, even though cases may be strong, they may be very similar, and but yet we tend to still see some similar hiring patterns, and that's where I see now going forward and spending my time, particularly trying to understand what's occurring with black males. My interest also with black males now has been very much so globalized in a way that was sparked from a paper that I was invited to do along with James Moore, and at the time my student Raul Leon, who's a professor at Eastern Michigan now. We were invited to look at male underachievement across the globe, and entering into this project, I think we all, but I can speak for myself, entered into it with a set of assumptions. And those assumptions were that the challenges that we tend to talk about for African American males was specifically endemic to the United States. That these are challenges that are solely linked to being black in the United States of America. And we talk about it like that when we have our narratives at research conferences, when we have narratives in policy forums, and in just general discourse. And what we surprisingly found in needing to review all the literature done across the globe that looked at males in general, but black males in particular, we found a scary, or let's not say scary, but a very interesting set of similarities where it was very surprising to find out the shared experiences and realities, whether you were in Detroit, Michigan, or you were in London, right? You don't tend to think about black males in London having the same experiences that you might characterize in Detroit, Chicago, or other major urban areas in the United States. But we did find this to be of interest and value. And at the time of doing that work, I did ask one question, and it was, I'd be very intrigued to know what would happen if you put in one room the top researchers across the globe on black males, high impact practitioners, policymakers, and funders in one room. What would that dialogue be? And going on 5 years ago, we were given an opportunity to do that through a grant. Dr. James Moore and myself held the first international colloquium on black males in education, which we have now kind of constructed as the global convening of top researchers and high impact practitioners. And it is an amazing event and venue, and it's growing into kind of the professional space where we can convene and talk as researchers, policymakers, and practitioners about moving the work that we do collectively and in forward in important ways to make a difference.